Thanks for inviting me. This is a presentation, so I haven't changed it at all since what I gave to New England Waterworks. I know many of you, so I don't know that I need much of a greeting here. I've been staring at water use numbers for 30 plus years, so COVID comes along and naturally I was interested to see what that might do to water use. I know Jen and I were talking around early last year, and I know Jen had an interest as well. So that was kind of the genesis of this project. At the same time, I know that we work with WPI students each year to try to give them some relevant project work. And we incorporated this as a project where we reached out and they did a lot of numbers crunching. So that's kind of the background on why. Again, our project team was myself and Lynn June from DEP, and then several students from WPI and their advisors. So what we were looking at was water use from 2015 to 2020, using the annual statistical reports that all water suppliers file. We started our data set was 290 systems. Unfortunately, 15 of them either didn't have a complete data set, so they might have been missing a year or missing some of the data, or we just had some data concerns. So 15 of the 290 were excluded. So our data set is 275 public water systems. That's the numbers we crunched to evaluate. And our comparison is pretty much that. 2015 to 2019 kind of as the average, and then looking at 2020, how that may have changed. Another data source we used was this median household and family income. So we were, it was just something I had an interest in. Watching the news during the pandemic, how our EJ communities, how this may have impacted them versus some of our other communities. So using that median household income, we worked in a couple of analysis of data on that. And what did we look at? We looked at how total water use may have changed in our systems, how residential gallons per capita a day may have changed, consumption patterns. So did residential use go up? Did institutional uses go down? Commercial uses go down? That was another analysis we evaluated. And then some of the variables, again, we wanted to see kind of how income played out. We had two pretty significant droughts, one being in 2020, one being 2016. That certainly has the potential to impact the data. And we did kind of a quick look at how community differences may have happened. So when I say community, did the Cape and Islands react differently than other areas of the state? So this graphic is, the water use picture over 2015 to 2020. I have no explanation for why 2017 was our high year in that window of time. It wasn't one of our, major drought years. And maybe the fact it wasn't a drought year and water use restrictions weren't a big trigger. I don't know. And that, we started down the road of trying to piece out how the drought played out. And I don't think we had a satisfactory answer to that. On average, water use averaged 592 million gallons per day over the course of these 5 years. And the summer average, it goes up to 738 million gallons over those 275 systems that I talked about earlier. So, that's just kind of the picture. Here's, looking at how water use restrictions may have impacted things. Again, we didn't really have a great way to dictate this, but this is we publish these maps. And if you're not familiar with them, they are published, I will say monthly. In the summertime, we publish them on our website, indicating who has water use restrictions and who does not, and the severity of those restrictions. These are our two drought years during our review period. 2016, we had significantly more water use restrictions than we did in 2020. We had, I want to say, we had the darker the color, the more stringent the restrictions. So you can see, hopefully you can see my cursor. 1 day a week of watering is that dark orange. 1 day a week or less of watering. There was 97 systems in September of 2016 that were doing 1 day or less of watering. It doesn't look this way, but by the count of our Excel spreadsheet, we had only 20 systems who were doing 1 day or less in September of 2020. So the restrictions were more stringent in 2016 based on our quick look on these maps. So that certainly is going to have an impact on water use. Exactly how much, I don't know. Another way we looked at water use was this bar graph. The light blue is 2016, the purple is 2020, and then the average is the hatched line. The average water use, and this is this is the average total water use for those 275 systems. 2016 was the high one of the total. Again, 2017 was higher than all, but when you average it out, 2016 was higher than the average water use. It was higher than the 2020 water use. And in 2020, comparing to 2016, there was 2 months and October, you can see the difference is very small. 2020 is September is the only month where that was higher than the same month in 2016. So water use is down. We've got on our bar graph, the restrictions, kind of the statewide lockdown began in mid-March, and you can see pretty quickly how March's water use, in April in particular, how much we are down over what we are doing in 2016 and over the average years. That's other than the lockdown, I can't account for why September maybe, 2020, I don't know that September was as bad as 2016. That was where we were really in the drought. So maybe the really stringent restrictions of 2016 and people recognizing how dry it was, they cut down their water use. In 2020, again, these are all assumptions on my part. In 2020, people, had been locked down. They're out. They wanted to, businesses were starting to reopen, and that may account for why September's use went up the way it did. This is how community by community, and I have another one that kind of breaks it out, but this is the change by system. And this, a couple of things that are hidden in this is that some towns have 2 public water systems. Barnstable has 4, for example. So Barnstable is not reflecting 4 numbers. It's reflecting likely the largest public system is how we call it. So not everything's being reflected here, but what you're seeing is that most of our systems went up or down by 10%. The yellow communities are went down 10%. Those in light blue went up 10%. The darker the color, greater than 20%. So you see some systems that are red, you see some systems that are really dark blue. But for the most part, most of them stayed within the 10% range. And graphically, we represent this here is of the 275 systems, 205, if my math is right, and I've lost track of my notes, but most of our systems, again, stayed within that 10%. I want to say it was 80% of our systems stayed within that 10% range, up or down. Some of the outliers here, percentiles, are very small systems. I called a few of them just because I was intrigued because their water use was so up or down so significantly. And one of them told me, you know, they had a leak, they found the leak, boom, their water use went down. It was a very small system. So what I've shown on here is, our biggest decrease was 39%, that decrease being the 2020 to the average. So it went down 39%. Six of them went down by more than 20%, but none of those six went down by over 100 million gallons over the year. So, I draw that to mean that most of these were very small systems that just had a really significant change. And it could be COVID related. It could be, a community in Western Mass that had a college, and that college shut down, and people, their water use just went down. That could be it. It could be the leak, as I mentioned. We didn't do a deep dive. We didn't have the time to deep dive into what was the cause of each of these. On the increase side, the biggest increase was 31%. We had 12 that were over 20%, and two of those were pretty large systems. Being over, the increase in water use was over 100 million gallons for the calendar year, and those were the city of Chelsea and the city of Waltham. So how did sectoral water use change? I'll focus on this graphic here. So this is the kind of the pie chart of how water is used by each component. Residential use being this big piece of the pie, and then decreasing pieces. This is residential, institutional, commercial. Ag, there's a sliver there, but we can't even see it because the percentage of public water systems that sell it to ag is so small. Industrial, municipal, and then other. So what happened in 2020 was, on average, it's normally 68% is this blue, the residential. In 2020, that percentile of the pie was 72%. So not unexpectedly, me sitting at home today, I'm not using water in Boston, I'm using it in my house. So that, not a surprise. The graphic here on the other side is, you've got a water use change. So overall water use went down over the average. The average we used, this is metered water use. So that's why the difference from the other graphs, which had unaccounted for in total pumping. But, of the total metered water use, or commonly estimated water use, that number went from 483 down to 472. So the average 483 million gallons, 472 in 2020. Residential water use went up 10 million gallons, which is roughly about a 3% increase. And you can see the only other one that went up was ag, and it went up by 40%, but the number is so small it distorts the graphic here. All water use types went down: residential, institutions, commercial, industrial, municipal/institutional, and the others. So residential went up. That's why that part of the pie was bigger, and for the most part, the other ones all went down. Not a shock. I think that's when we went into this project, that was kind of my expectation, and the data proved that to be the case. Sorry, did I jump? Trying to get my face out of the screen so I can see it. So the residential water use, we looked at it. So the 2020 to the averages again, for the most part, it was plus 10%. And, we had a bigger increase. I mean, there's a significant number that are in that 10% range, plus or minus 10%. 184 of the 275. We did see some pretty, much more an increase on the residential side. You can see 58-16 versus over here, we're seeing much smaller numbers. How that plays out by community, the lowest reduction of the average of 2020 to the average was 41%. 14 went down by 10% or more 10%. And there was three large over 100 million gallons in reductions in these three systems. On the plus side, we had 19 that went up by more than 20%. And 5 of those 19 were what will, again, defining large by meaning that the reduction was over 100 million gallons. You can see who those communities were. So residential went up, and the data reflected that. On the non-residential side, as we know from the previous graphic, there was reductions on the non-residential side. I can't account for who, we can dig that up, but I don't know off the top of my head who went down by 93%. 31 public water systems went down by more than 30%. And again, the 100 million line is those systems that were large who had a non-residential reduction of more than 100 million gallons. And on the up plus side, somebody's went up 228. Again, off the top of my head, I don't know what that is. It's pretty crazy change. 19 of the public water systems went up by more than 30%, and only one of those went by 100 million gallons. RGPCD, so I think everyone's familiar with that. That's a performance standard we apply in our permits. We wanted to see how those numbers might have changed using kind of the same color scheme. We looked at those, the light blue went up by 10%. The very dark blue went up by more than 20%, and the very dark red down by more than 20%, with the orange being 0 to 20%. So you can see how that RGBCD changed by community type or by community. And then this is reflecting the RGBCD in 2020. Our number statewide so the number went down from 275 systems. We don't calculate this number, RGBCD, on the Cape or the islands. So the average for the 257 public systems remaining went up to 58, almost 59 residential gallons per person per day. And the average, that number was 56. So the average, we had 56. So we had more communities who went up. We had 11 systems that, from we'll call it a compliance standpoint, not that they're necessarily non-compliance, but 11 systems went from 65 or below to above 65. And, that's not a huge, it's 5%, roughly 5% swing of compliance. So we're working, that I don't think, none of them should expect an NON any day soon, but that's kind of how it played out. We wanted to see the difference, how the city's water use may have changed to the towns. We didn't do it exactly by what's a city, what technically is a city. We did it by the systems who serve more than 50,000 people. Now, some of those might be called towns, and we certainly have some cities that serve less than 50,000 people, but we drew the line at 50,000 people or above. We had 24 systems. Their total water use decreased by 10 million gallons. And you can see this graphic here is how their RGPCDs changed in the cities being orange, the towns being blue. That difference is a norm. A lot less water use per person in the cities, less lawns to water. And you can see that RGPCD went up a little bit in the cities over what it had done the prior years, at least back to 2016 and 15, where their RGPCD was up. And then this graphic is the total water use volumes for our cities. So the average day was around 243 million gallons, and down significantly when it was up to 263 back in the early years. So cities' water use generally went down. Another comparison, as I mentioned, we wanted to see how the Cape and Islands may have played out, and total water use on the Cape and Islands and MGD, you can see it went up. And over the prior 3 years, it was close to what we were at in 2016 and 2015. So it looks like a lot of people went to the Cape and stayed on the Cape versus prior years where they might have been shuttling back and forth, working remotely. So if we're on a take-home message, that might be a place who's going to start seeing more consistent increases in water use. And versus here is how everybody's water use played out, that 275. You can see for whatever reason, and I don't know what that is, 2017 was the high year. 2020's use was higher than 19 and a little bit higher than 18, but how it played out statewide. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted to see how the environmental justice kind of numbers played out. So just roughly off the top of my head, the median household income number we used was, I want to say the median was roughly, it was a 5-year average. It was 81 to 82 $1,000 per year was the median average. And then the 65 percentile number was roughly 52, and the 200% was 162,000. Give you a sense of the range of the income. So this is the RGPCD of the communities who were above the 200 percentile. You know, they went up, their RGPCD went up in 2020. It went up over what it was in 2016. It went up more significantly over, increased 9% over what it does on average. And then the communities, the environmental justice communities that we had, similar changes. Didn't go quite as high as it did in 2016, but then the numbers are, it went up slightly in 2020 over the average. And then the water use volume. So again, this is kind of distorting it. The communities, the environmental justice communities, naturally they have more water use in them. So I think we had 9 communities that fell into this category. I think we had 14 in this category. They often were larger, so it distorts the water use. You can see the volumes in 2016 to the 2020 volume and to the average volume. So the water use went down some, not hugely, but it went down some. And here it was pretty level. So there weren't huge differences, would be my take home out of these, that, kind of how they normally use water was kind of how the 2020 water use played out in these, the differences between the high median household income and the lower median household incomes. And we did a couple of snapshots of how, just because Boston is the big residential, big magnet of the state, kind of looking at how their water use may have changed. And you can see 2020, huge reductions over what they did particularly when the lockdown first kicked in, March, April, May, even June. Water use is way down, and you can see that in these circles. This is the 2020 is the outside ring. So 52% of water use in Boston was what happened last year, whereas normally it's 47%. And the commercial industrial side, it went from 25% down to 21%. So, me not going into Boston certainly impacted their water use. And Amherst, just because of its unique nature, we just threw them up on the slide. Same thing, the outer ring of this circle represents their residential water use. In 2020, the inner circle represents the average, and you can see their residential water use. So a lot of students who either live off campus or maybe even some on campus, it went a huge drop from 64% down to 49%. And sorry, I take that back. It was a huge increase. So residential water use, the people who live in town, their water use went up and over the average. And then the institution, the schools closing, that dropped that from a 42% average down to 26% of their water use. And so my conclusions, I kind of said them throughout that, water use went down. Residential water use, not surprisingly, went up. And I think the Cape and Islands, if we were looking at this as a long-term, what does remote working mean? If I were living on the Cape and Islands as a water system, I would be thinking we're going to start seeing more water use, with obviously weather being a big variable in that. That's kind of what my take home was from this study. So Catherine Schliff is going to do, I think, more expansive work on this. And I don't know if Catherine wants to add anything about what her project involves, but that was our kind of snapshot. I'd really love to dig deeper into it. We just don't have time. We're writing permits for gender review.